Welcome to Approaches to Listening. I'm William Taylor, the host and author. Episode 2, Listening in Practice and Performance. I had one of my most pivotal moments as a musician when I was 14. My brother had put hours of classical music on my MP3 player because he deemed my musical education insufficient. And he was right. I would listen to these works as I went about my day, not super actively, but occasionally a work would capture my attention and I had to stop and do nothing but listen. One of those works that grabbed my attention was Fauré's Requiem. I knew from the first second of the piece that I needed to drop everything and listen. So I grabbed a blanket and went onto my front porch. That day my hometown was cold, almost freezing, and a thick fog covered the whole town. I was warm in my blanket, and in that cold but warm state, I listened to the Requiem. I can't remember everything about that experience, but I do remember wishing it could go on forever. Why was this such a pivotal moment for me? Because in that moment, I learned how much I love to listen to music. I had studied piano for years before I realized that the music I listened to had a tremendous impact on how I made music. I don't mean that I listened to a lot of classical music, so I played a lot of classical music. I mean that what I heard shaped my conception of music and became what I tried to replicate, which led to some good practices and some bad ones. A turning point for me was when one of my teachers told me that I should listen to myself while I played. I was super confused by this initially, and I immediately thought, I do listen to myself. Are you trying to subtly say that I didn't catch a mistake I've been making or something? But thankfully, with a little coaching, I was able to progress from listening to what I do to really hearing the music I was making. I'm a collaborative pianist, which makes extra room for listening in my music making. As a beginning collaborative pianist, my listening responsibilities were simple. Listen to make sure me and my collaborative partner are together, and see that I don't overpower the soloist with the accompaniment. I got really good at this type of listening, but I also wasn't fully content with just this type of listening. I later learned that the type of listening I described was a very simple form of active listening, and it was simple in that it had one objective: to look for anything wrong, and I would do that through analysis and critique. Let me further explain what I mean when I say this is one of the simplest forms of active listening, and I'll use my early experiences as a collaborative pianist for an example. In all my coaching, I had a score that labeled what was supposed to happen and where. It was easy to reference the score and tell someone every place where they deviate from it. For example, you didn't change the dynamics in verse 2, or you started the ritardando 3 beats early. I didn't have to explain why it was wrong, just that it was, and the score proved the point. The most diverse listeners have tools beyond this method, and avoid listening just to critique. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." I believe that's true, and I also believe that's why most listeners lead out with the analytical and critical filters. Jung's quote also warns us about a danger of using critique too much. Once we have developed a system of critique, it's easy to stop really thinking about the things that we critique. They're either right or wrong, desirable or not, and all we have to do is judge because our thinking is done. An optimized approach to listening adds the use of the experiential and exploratory filters, and focuses on what could be while paying sufficient attention to what should or shouldn't be in our music. Needless to say, having all 4 filters on the table is the most optimal approach, but requires a careful balance which is more complete than any semblance of balance that occurs when even one filter is absent. When we focus on what could be and what should be, we start to make our music come alive. It becomes immersive, enticing the audience to listen more completely. Better yet, when we combine the thinking filters and the feeling filters, we get both the benefit of being grounded while opening ourselves up to express the music. The key to that type of music making is listening well. Listening well when you're just listening well when you're practicing, and listening well in performance. I believe that our listening fuels our practice and performance. It's important to note that if we only apply the critical and analytical filter when we listen to music, then we will take that approach into practice sessions and performances, both our performances and others. That's why a varied and intentional approach to listening is so important to a performing musician, an approach that utilizes both feeling and thinking, an approach that takes care of the future without abandoning the moment. So let's talk about listening in practice. First, what's the goal of practice? Klickstein's A Musician's Way says, "Practice is the deliberate, creative process of improving musical ability and of mastering music for performance." It's worth taking a moment to consider what will happen if we don't adequately listen throughout that process. We can drill technique, we can run through a work, we can memorize, but what happens if we're not really hearing what we're doing in the moment? We are going to end up thinking or feeling the wrong things when we approach our music. We will be able to reinforce and build the things that can be counted, but without in the moment listening, it's impossible to find those things that you can't count, the things that tend to matter the most. Now, when I say we'll think and feel the wrong things, I use that word wrong intentionally. And I hope to convince you by the end of this episode that my use of the word wrong is in fact correct. Here's a case study where I'll use a university music program to demonstrate this point. In university music programs, there's almost always a performance on your horizon. Even if you're a freshman, you're already looking ahead to a junior or senior recital. Along with that performance comes a deadline, and with that deadline, pressure to prepare. I've felt that pressure through my bachelor's and master's degrees, and I feel it now in my doctoral studies. If we're not careful, that pressure starts to shape our whole musical experience. And if we respond to the pressure by leaning on just the analytical and critical filters, then we approach our music out of time. If you are making music while analyzing or critiquing it, then I believe it's impossible to truly be in the moment. And if this approach is consistently practiced, then the moment all but disappears from our musical experiences. That's a big problem that we have to overcome in a university music program. We're all trying to improve our abilities through practice. But when pressure to perform perfectly drives our listening, practice, and our approach to performance, then we tend to rely almost entirely on analysis and critique and how they'll secure our future. If we listen just for the future, practice just for the future, when we get to the performance, it's going to be hard to not do it just for the future. For musicians who are planning to pursue a terminal degree, senior recitals become audition material, and the cycle goes on and on. Here's a good diagnostic question for university musicians. How often do you listen to the type of music you study just because? For fun, or because you love it? Not because you're learning it or need to be able to recognize it for a literature exam. Our listening fuels our practice, and it should ground us to our love of the art we're studying. This is why we need the feeling filters, the experiential and exploratory filters. One of their essential characteristics is that they happen in time, in the present. If we invest everything in the future, what do we have to cover our needs today? University music programs are shaped in a way that orient us toward the future and growth. The two things we need to balance then are, one, the ability to really connect with our music by truly hearing it in the moment, and two, we need to do that while we simultaneously prepare for the future. That's a tricky balance to find, And that's why it's good that we have 4 filters to help us refocus when things become unbalanced. Since that balance is so difficult to find, I'll explore 3 words that to me describe a balanced blend of present and future. And that's what's needed both in practice, in listening, and in performance. If one of these words matches your needs perfectly, please use it. But hopefully each word will offer something to you that the others do not. Let's start with word number 1, play. First off, play is literally the verb we use when discussing instrumental music making. I play the piano. The Oxford Dictionary's primary definition of play is to, quote, engage in activity for enjoyment and recreation, rather than a serious or practical purpose, end quote. That definition leans heavily on the present side of the present-future balance we're striving for. But play, when it's done right, also connects us to the future. One of my specialties is ludomusicology, or the study of video game music. As such, I'm a well-versed gamer, and one of the most attractive things about video games is their ability to offer more and more to a player. This spans the spectrum of games, from mobile games that give you an increasing daily reward, to role-playing games that give you hours of exposure to characters and their progress and their journeys. Part of what makes the best kind of games is a promise of increasing returns, and the same principle applies to play. Author Jordan Peterson, who largely informed my ideas about play, said, "Paradise is a place where you play forever, and the game just gets better and better. If the game, or the music, or your practice remains the same, then play isn't truly present." University musicians commonly practice in repetitive and grueling ways, but we tell ourselves it's okay because it's for the future. But the future won't be ideal if we stop pursuing the moment in a playful way. One of the ways that practice stagnates, especially in university programs, is poor listening. And not just poor listening, but poor and unvaried listening. The problem is that we develop the analytical and critical filters of listening and expect them to provide the solution to any problem we encounter. But that results in only using half the tools we need to finish our work. And that's a great recipe for making suboptimal progress in any field. When we get stuck like that, it's easy to tell ourselves, I'm just not working hard enough. Or maybe we even jump to, I'm not cut out for this. My recommendation in those moments is to listen. Engage with your music in the moment, or take time off from practicing to connect with music through active listening, especially while using the exploratory or experiential filters, the feeling filters. For academic musicians, it's more common to be too forward-focused than too moment-focused. Active listening can help us combat the never-ending forward pressure generated by music programs. The moment won't appear if you don't listen with room for the feeling filters. The future may become more secure, but that's only a pseudo-moment if your experience is only derived from a future promise. You need something in the present as well. So what happens when you combine that future orientation with the dictionary's enjoyment or play-focused approach that is more oriented towards the present? First, you'll get something today, a moment where the music is alive, where the music is fun and engaging, a moment when it becomes more than just an assignment or recital piece. Second, you'll see and hear what's preventing you from having more of that. Maybe your scales aren't quite quick enough, so you lose momentum that would add to the work's vitality. So you practice in that context, not just because the scales aren't learned or aren't fast enough. Rather, they're inhibiting the music you both want to make and experience making. So you play your instrument. You practice for both the future and for the experience today. and that's a pattern that you'd be happy to repeat tomorrow. This is a balance that's impossible to find without listening. When your music is giving more back to you than you put in, you're truly playing the piece. Word number 2, journey. Here are some nice antonyms to journey that you might have experienced when too much pressure meets practice or performance. Retreat, withdrawal, halt, and remain. A good example of journey is characterized by Rapunzel in Disney's Tangled, who stays in her tower for years until she finds the courage to travel with Flynn Rider to reach her dream. I especially like this Disney portrayal, and one of my favorite scenes is a conversation between Flynn and Rapunzel once they reach their goal. Rapunzel worries if the experience will be all that she hoped that it would be. She's even scared that it will be all she hoped it would be, and she'll be left without a dream to pursue. Flynn tells her that's when she gets to go find a new dream. That's the beauty of journeying. You savor the moment while heading toward a dream or goal. And after you find that dream or achieve that goal, you continue your journeying by doing the same thing you just did. For musicians, if we don't journey, we're fighting a depressing battle, one that could continue the rest of our lives. In my university experience, I always find that I place the highest priority on my next performance by devoting my best practicing to that repertoire. And then the second that performance is over, I start thinking about my next performance. You can't escape this cycle as a musician, so you need to utilize it well. That is why it's so crucial to accept the pattern of journeying. Now, the first time you perform a great work can be an especially sticky thing in the university. I remember learning Debussy's Pour le Piano Suite for my undergraduate senior recital, and I was determined to master it for this performance. Here I am, several years later, and today's best preparation has far exceeded what I could do as an undergraduate. My best continually gets better, which is what I want from a musical education, but I usually don't give myself permission to think that way as I approach a performance, especially a high-stakes degree recital. It's worth considering and remembering the following question. Where will your understanding of a piece be in 5 or 10 years, after 3, 5, or 7 more performances of it? A great first performance is a worthy goal, but it's only the first goal if you accept the idea of journeying as a musician and performer. The problem with only an end goal is that our focus will shift to being done. And didn't we go into university music programs to do music forever? We need to enjoy the journey, and key to that is listening to our music, really hearing what we and other musicians offer. If everything is destination-based, we'll start feeling like Rapunzel. What if this performance isn't everything I hope it could be? What if it is? You need an arrival point to journey well. You must also remember that the journey is the thing, and you know you're doing it right when you enjoy the day while moving towards your future goals. It's also worth pointing out that what-ifs are an element of the thinking filters, and as such must be balanced with feeling. Journeying also gives you resilience when things don't go according to plan. What if you get sick before a performance, or injure yourself, but the show goes on, albeit in a less than desirable way? What if you can't get that string quartet together, or you're struggling to get along with your collaborative partners? An attitude of journeying insulates you and protects you from the fragility of that pristine destination. But journeying does even more than that. In a very real way, it combines what you're doing with where you're going. Journey and arrival become combined into one. Without the arrival point, the journey becomes directionless and lethargic. But without the journeying, the destination obscures the day-to-day. Proper journeying combines future and present into one. It combines all four listening filters into one. And that's the way that musical practice should be. The key element to emulsify and bind those disparate features together is varied, intentional listening. Now, before we move on to the final word, I ask you to bear with me, as the ideas I'm about to lay out are the most complete in this episode, but are also the most dense. Another way of saying that is I think the next part of the podcast has the most information and value to offer academic musicians, but will require more of anyone listening than the previous information. Word 3, faith. And I'm not talking about a religious faith, but more about a philosophical and practical use of the word faith. To cover this portion, I'll draw on philosophical ideas from the New Testament, the film Chariots of Fire, the Book of Mormon, and Henry David Thoreau, and I'll start with a quote from the latter. "We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by the infinite expectation of the dawn. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture, or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts." Again, bear with me as I unpack this beautifully dense thought. We can affect the quality of our day by practicing an infinite expectation of the dawn. That expectation is key to, quote, staying awake, in Thoreau's words. Dawn can wake us, but to stay awake, we need to hold the expectation of dawn infinitely. And that looking forward, that expectation, is well characterized by the word faith. Once we're in possession of this faith, this infinite expectation of the dawn, we can affect the quality of any day. And again, in Thoreau's words, that is the highest of arts, or what the best artists should do. Remarkably, that expectation, that looking forward, somehow affects the quality of the day, this day or today. Just like with play and journeying, faith prepares you for the future while giving you something meaningful today. A little more on faith before we tie it into music. In the New Testament, in Paul's epistles to the Hebrews, chapter 11, we read, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." This verse is an especially good counterpart to Thoreau's writings because of the words Paul employed, substance and evidence, both of which signify something very real and tangible. It's easy and incorrect to think of faith as something from one of Gollum's riddles in The Hobbit. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. That riddle is about the dark, not faith. If there's no evidence of things not seen, or substance of that which you hope for, then faith isn't present. To have faith means that our infinite expectation, or our looking forward to the future, must be met with substance or evidence in the present. When the quality of our day is affected by the aforementioned substance or evidence, then we are exercising faith and practicing the highest of the arts. Faith is especially important for overthinkers, and I count myself in that number. While overthinking, it's easy to pursue a goal of having all the answers, of being ready for anything, something that university music programs tend to promote, especially come performance time. But I find there's a cost to crossing every single T and dotting every single I. And unless that cost is balanced and mitigated by other factors, then to me, it is not worth it. When approaching a major performance, there's an expectation of complete preparation in a university setting. Singers should know the words they're singing and what they mean. Music should be memorized, and there shouldn't be any difficult passages that you're unsure of performing. But the immense pressure that this model promotes is the smaller part of my criticism to this approach. To me, the more egregious mistake of this approach is the cost of the moment that occurs when maximal preparation becomes inflexible performance. The problem is this: your thinking is done come performance time. Your listening is done. You figured the piece out, and a performance is merely a recitation of what you've learned, not live music. This is especially problematic when that experience is repeated and promoted across multiple years of education. Here's another way of saying this. Universities focus on things that can be counted or measured. So when they say cross every T and dot every I, it has to be understood that they don't give you all the T's and I's. If universities don't teach active listening in a comprehensive way, a way that teaches both feeling and thinking, that's when the cost of crossing all the measurable T's and I's becomes too much, when it takes the room meant for enjoyment, the moment, and real comprehensive listening. To help resolve this problem, I want to introduce a verse from the Book of Mormon. In a sermon on faith in the Book of Alma, chapter 32, we get this statement: "If a man knoweth a thing, he hath no cause to believe, for he knoweth it." In music making, we've all heard performances made up of empty virtuosity, or you've heard a performance that was technically perfect but lacking in depth. That's one of the results of a musician knowing everything. They don't need to believe it, because they know it. While accompanying a student for a round of auditions, I expressed that I wasn't really in the music, and that I was going to listen for what the music gave back to me and use that to perform the piece. Right after that, me and my collaborative partner had an extremely engaging and musical take. And when I asked my fellow musician what changed, he said, "It's like you said, the music gives back." Musicians who only focus on knowing inhibit the way the music gives back to them. Belief in your music and your purpose as a musician opens that symbiotic relationship that creators should have with the art they create. Now, how does this tie into faith? Let's go back to Thoreau, who said that the expectation of the dawn reawakens us and keeps us awake. So what about the dawn itself? Isn't that glorious event enough to reawaken us and keep us awake? And the answer is no, it's not enough. If we only have the dawn, then we have something very finite, and only an infinite expectation will keep awakening us. That partially explains why someone who knows something can do so without belief in the thing they know. Finite is nice. It's obtainable and measurable. But to hold something infinite is daunting at the very least. But that's every musician's dream, I feel, to make wonderful music forever. The only way I know how to do that is to balance your knowledge with belief, and that requires the constant exercise of faith. That means that you're not content with knowing, with having the thing you want right now. You're not content with being done, reaching the goal, or finishing the task, because if you are, then you're imposing limits on the potential music has in your life. When you only have a goal of getting there, what do you do after you've arrived? I don't think any of us want to win a medal, award, or audition so we can be done making our best music. We need both an attitude and approach that provides for today while improving tomorrow. The film Chariots of Fire highlights this very principle, and those who struggle with this principle. Here are some of Harold Abrams' lines as he progresses through his journey. And it's worth thinking about times where you might have thought similarly about your music. After losing his first race ever, he says, "I don't run to take beatings. I run to win. And if I can't win, I won't run." Later, as he prepares for his last chance to win an Olympic gold medal, he confides to a friend, "I'm forever in pursuit, and I don't know what I'm chasing. I'll raise my eyes and look down that corridor, 4 feet wide, with 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. I've known the fear of losing, but now I'm almost too frightened to win." Meanwhile, runner Eric Liddell shares his philosophy on running. "I want to compare faith to running in a race. It's hard. It requires concentration of will, energy of soul. I have no formula for winning a race. Everyone runs in their own way. And where does the power come from? To see the race to its end. From within. And in music, that power within is best found by listening. Faith is the key to believing what you know, even when you only have the evidence of things not seen, or the substance of things hoped for. With faith, you can reawaken yourself and find the energy to see your work through, and find out that both your potential and the power to reach it have always been inside you. Faith loosens your hold on the thinking or quantifiable filters and enables you to also reach for feeling, experience, and exploration within your music. Again, how do you practice faith as a musician? You listen, and you especially listen while using the feeling filters. You move beyond knowing you're playing the notes with a correct interpretation. You move beyond performing just to get the degree or win the next audition. You connect with the very essence of music, something that can only be done through listening. Remember, how you listen determines what you hear, and what you hear determines what you feel and think. It seems reasonable that we explore and focus on experience during our musical practice. But what about in performance? In my opinion, that's when we need to listen the most. When performing, we usually have a more pristine instrument, a beneficial or problematic space, collaborative partners, and an audience whose size can greatly affect our sound. But beyond that, and even more important, is this future-present balance that I believe applies equally to practice and performance. If you're only focused on the future as a performer, I guarantee you will not have as meaningful an experience as you would if you took time for the moment. I also believe that you will not reach your musical potential if you are only future-oriented. A performance shouldn't be a recitation of dry and grueling practice. To quote the Speed Racer film, it should be a living, breathing thing. If that wasn't the case, then we should all be content with recordings that use our best take and have been edited to perfection. If you're going to make a performance alive, or truly be alive when you perform, then skilled, active listening is essential. It's easy to identify pitfalls to this approach, and I've talked about them with other musicians and experienced them myself. After one performance as a university staff pianist, I expressed frustration with another pianist that I got too caught up in the music and lost myself for a moment, which resulted in a couple mistakes in my performance. I told her, "Those moments where the music is so nice that it just sucks you in and then you lose yourself, I hate that." To which she accurately responded, "But those moments are the most precious." It may seem like we're planning for those uncontrollable moments if you try to add the feeling filters or the moment-based filters to your performance. But I found that it's actually a safer approach to music making and a more enjoyable one. Here's a scenario that illustrates why. Say you're making music and all of a sudden it hits you like a ton of bricks. The message or meaning of the music just envelops you. What do you do when that happens? Especially in performance. I believe what my former colleague said. Those moments are the most precious. So if we want those precious moments and don't want to fall apart or become unsustainably vulnerable, then we need to practice those moments, or we need to have them in practice. The moment is paramount in both practice and performance. I think we tend to underestimate the phrase, the moment of truth. This isn't a podcast about truth, but truth seems like a very reasonable adjective for those precious, surreal moments in music making. More than that, those moments rarely last beyond just that, a moment. They'll influence you for a while yet and orient you in ways that I find very rewarding. But that instance of transcendence is rarely, if ever, a long-term experience. I've found that a moment will make or break a performance. I don't mean a moment in regards to those things that can be counted, but a moment where you move beyond those things. It's easy to approach a performance with a goal of perfection, but I found a much more obtainable and empowering goal is to truly find the moment, and find it just for a moment. Here are a few examples that show the power of the moment, both positive and negative. While playing an undergraduate recital with a very skilled singer, I found she was locking up mentally, and probably physically. I had been her pianist for a while and knew she was performing just fine, but not really engaging with the music, the audience, or the moment. So I tried to persuade her to really perform. I lavished all my skills on a short piano interlude and ended with an extra dramatic ritardando. I saw that the singer was uncomfortable, that I had broken from my normal interpretive choices, and then the light went on. She heard the music. She snapped out of her terrified introspection. She literally struck a pose, and away we went in the same space, with the same music, at the same time. The moment was the gateway to the bigger picture, the musical ideas, the genuine self-expression, and the other things that can't be counted that we really wanted to bring to the performance. I'm so glad she listened. While playing for an undergraduate baritone recital, I had the same experience in reverse. The performance was going exceptionally well. We were expressive, precise, and synced up. Then in one aria, the baritone forced a couple things and cracked in the climactic high G. The rest of the baritone's performance was precise, well sounded, and well interpreted, but empty as can be. I tried more than once to shake them from their fear-induced introspection, but no matter how tempting my bait, the singer just didn't bite. We represented the quantifiable elements very well that night, but beyond that, the latter part of the recital was lacking. Real listening in performance requires immense flexibility. So if you feel rigid or find your attitude is rigid, your listening is probably similarly restricted. And remember that flexibility must be learned in practice so it can be used in performance. It's important to remember that those gateway moments are rarely repeatable. It takes original thought or original feeling to really be in the moment. So one of the best ways you can find those moments is by becoming a versatile listener. When we learn how to listen, we also learn how to find the moment. We learn to be in time. And if we're fortunate enough to master this skill, we can be in time while giving sufficient attention to the future. For performing musicians, this skill is critical, as our profession revolves around two key elements: sound and time. Most musicians can master playing in tempo, but a rarer skill is the ability to play in time, to make the moment, truly hear it, and react accordingly. That's why I believe it is wrong to approach both practice and performance with only a future orientation, one that is based entirely in analysis and critique. If the future dictates how you listen, then it will dictate what you hear, how you feel, and how you think. If you can find the play, the journeying, and have faith in the art of making music, then you can find what you need today while securing the promise of an increasing tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Please join me for episode 3 next week. If you'd like to support me or see more of my work, please visit my Patreon page or submit your email to my newsletter. The links will be in the show notes.